It's interesting that one of the most common fears that people have when they start a fitness program is not the fear of injury, it's not the fear of fitting in, it's not the fear of not knowing what to do, it's the fear of becoming bulky. Hello and welcome to another episode of Beast of Burden. My name's Paul Bassett. This podcast is part of my business, Hounds of Health, which is a personal training business in Wandsworth, London. And we help predominantly very busy professional individuals in London take charge of their health, get stronger, get fitter, and make some real inroads into their health. And as a fitness coach, as a business owner, and having worked in the fitness industry for a long time, I come across a lot of different scenarios. I come across a lot of questions, a lot of fears, a lot of success, and a lot of failures when it comes to people and their health. And today's episode really gets to the root of one of the big fears that a lot of people have. And yes, it's more common in women than it is in men, but I do hear it from both men and women, which is the fear of becoming bulky. And I'm sure that's cast some kind of image into your mind of what that might be. For many people, the fear of getting bulky is they have a vision of Arnold Schwarzenegger or one of the more modern bodybuilders, particularly the ones these days, which are huge. You know, we call them the mass monsters. They have that in their head, not only vision of a man, but they also have the vision of an equivalent woman who has massive shoulders and is looking hugely strong and over-muscled. And that is in stark contrast, let's be honest, it's in stark contrast to what's in the media. And the media is, I suppose there's been a bit of a turnaround over the last few years where there's been more variety of people's body shapes, from everything from the everyday person on the adverts to obviously plus size models, things like that. And you do see a wider spectrum of body types, but typically there is a tendency towards the skinny rather than the athletic. And when we're starting to think about getting strong, which is a goal for a lot of our clients, so when I make those sales calls, when I get on the phone and I start saying to people, right, how can we help you? What are you looking for? What's the guiding North Star? They're saying, I want to have more energy. They're saying they want to be more consistent. They say they obviously want to lose some weight. And then, they want to get stronger. And with that, they'll have a little bit in brackets or a little caveat there that says, but I don't want to get bulky. And we've all seen bodybuilders in real life. Well, I've certainly seen a few bodybuilders in real life, and they do look otherworldly. It is a very different, kind of almost jarring experience to see someone who's got that much muscle. And what I wanted to do today is allay some fears, okay? And I think they're legitimate fears, don't get me wrong. I think maybe when you see a lot of personal trainers talk about this subject, they're a bit dismissive. And I'll be honest, the people I'm working with, they've got other things on their plate. They're thinking about a million different things, and one of the things they're thinking about is getting fit. Now, in the fitness industry, kind of everyone knows that the chances of getting bulky are pretty low. Okay, pretty low, okay? We know that in the fitness industry. And so if a personal trainer came up to me, I'd be like, you obviously not got much experience in the industry if you're telling me that. But most people who we work with, they've got other things on their plate, they've got other specialities, they've got other areas of expertise, and fitness is not one of them. And they have a clear idea of what they want. They have societal and social pressures which are telling them this is what fitness, this is what aesthetics look like. And then they're trying to marry that in their head with being in a room, and I've got a ton of kettlebells behind me, you can see over there I've got the barbells, where when they associate strength, which they've been told is important, they associate strength with world's strongest man, with really strong female rugby players, people who are very athletic, and off the back of that, they're making some assumptions about what they're going to achieve. We've all seen those memes where someone says, and I'll say them because in a way they're quite funny, but they're probably not appropriate to say. Certainly as me as a coach, they're not appropriate to say. But I've just taken up running, but I'm worried that I'm going to end up winning the Olympics. Or I've just started cooking my own evening meals, but but I've stopped because I'm a bit worried that I'm going to become a Michelin star chef. And I think we could apply that a little bit to getting bulky. So the chances of getting to that level of physique that you see on the stages is the equivalent of running probably a 2-hour marathon as a beginner runner. It is that level of achievement. But you see, the reason I want to talk about it, and you're probably looking at me going, Paul, you're not bulky. What are you talking about? How do you know how to get there? Things like that. So my own personal journey, I was quite overweight, and this podcast has been going for a while. So I've done an episode on my own journey, not a video episode, but an episode of podcast. So you can see that on iTunes and Spotify. But I was very overweight in my 20s for a variety of reasons, and I started getting into running. I lost a lot of weight, and I started to get quite lean. And I actually got down, well, what am I at the moment? I'm about 86, 87 kilos, and I was about over 120. I went down to around about 70, so you can see I got very light. And that all came through running and focusing on my diet. I followed the teachings of a guy called Phil Maffetone, some great advice around food there, and great endurance coach. So I did a lot of his work, and I got down to being very light. And then I started getting into strength sports and things like kettlebell sport, which is quite a niche sport, and that's what I really, really enjoy. But I've skilled myself up over the last 10, 15 years to help people with their aesthetic goals. And I am predominantly a strength coach. That's what we do in the studio. That's how I help people. And my sport, kettlebell sport, does not prioritize mass. It's more like being a martial artist where you've got weight categories. You want to be strong within your weight category. It is a strength endurance sport, so the focus is on being stronger over time rather than maximal strength. And I've never really had a desire or a goal to compete as a bodybuilder or anything like that. But I also know how to get the everyday person much stronger, get them very aesthetic. And we've run programs for clients which drop body fat and increase muscle mass, ready for photo shoots. I've got some lighting here, we've got the camera. We've actually got a photo shoot scheduled on 26th of April in our studio for people who are wanting to lean up and get more aesthetic. So this is something that we deal with all the time. And so one of the reasons I know how hard it is to bulk is because in order for me to bulk, it is incredibly tough. I've never found it easy. I don't think genetics play a big role. And I think one of the reasons people will not get bulky, one of the fears, is genetics. And the first thing is, it's going to be easier for me to bulk than it is for a woman because I'm a man and I have testosterone. But even as a man, the level of effort is quite high, and also the frequency in which you need to train and the style of training is really, really big, really, really different. So I think the reason I can speak from a bit of authority is because I train pretty hard, but I do not bulk in the traditional sense. I have more muscle than I had when I was 70 kilos. And I'm certainly much stronger, but I am not what I would call bulky, okay? Not unless it's running up to Christmas, and the bulking is a very different kind of bulk. But I think what I wanted to do is talk about the psychology of bulking. I think a lot of the time it's not about the muscle, okay? I think people know that when they start a strength training program, they're gonna put on some kind of muscle, because they want to be stronger. Most people are under-muscled. I'm rarely worried about someone being over fat, so having too much body fat. I'm much more worried about someone being under-muscled. I think it's going to have a bigger effect on your metabolism. It's going to have a big effect on your injury rates. It's going to have a bigger effect on every aspect of your body, not only your function, your mental health, things like that. So muscle's massive. I think it's less about the muscle, it's more about the social perception. As I mentioned earlier, everything in the industry is geared up for women being smaller, things like that. Six-pack abs, things like that, but not being muscular. I think for a lot of people, it's about a loss of control of the journey. It's about crossing some invisible line where you go from being really, really happy with your physique to suddenly being out of control. And because I think a lot of people don't understand the process of getting there, at some point they think by virtue of lifting the weights, they will lose control of that process and that their body will take over and the weight will somehow dictate the consequence or the outcome. And also it's a loss of control over the fear of how you'll be seen, We see ourselves in the mirror every day. We have a sense of who we are, but we also don't really have control over how other people view us. We have control over how we view other people. We may think, I don't like that look. And you think, well, if I get like that, if I lose control of this process, a process which I've never really started, so I don't even know how to do it, and then I'm going to hand it off to someone else like Paul or someone in his team or a personal trainer, how can I trust that they are not going to run away with and follow their goals? Because I see other people doing this and they're very big. Or my husband does it and he's quite strong, he's a bit big, and I'm worried I'm going to look like him. So I think the key thing is like we need to separate the reality from the narrative. They're really two different things. There's the social narrative and the eternal narrative, and there's the reality of it, okay? So the reality is that muscle growth is pretty slow, okay? I've got a young guy at the moment, I think he's 27, 28. Around about that age. He has been working with us since June last year. He came in as a complete novice. And in the meantime, he's had an operation, but he had a major operation, which did interrupt him a little bit. But basically, he joined us probably about a year ago. And over that year, he's been steadily showing up and doing the work. He's now lost around about just under 13 kilograms of body fat. His total weight is down by about 6 kilos, but he's lost around 13 kilos of fat. So you can see that the scale doesn't always tell us everything, does it? He's put on about 3.5 to just over 3.5 kilos of muscle in that time frame. He's in the prime of his life, he's 27. So if you do the maths on how many, like if a block of butter is 250 grams, and you look at, there needs to be 4 blocks of butter in 1 kilo of fat, you do the maths, okay? He's lost 40 plus, almost 50 blocks of butter of weight off his body. So that 13 kilos of body fat has gone from his body versus the 3.5 kilos of muscle growth on a young man with testosterone, with no kids, who has control over his diary, control over what he eats, training twice a week, okay? And I would say, and moderately strong, he's working on his strength, and what he is a total operator when it comes to showing up. Every time he's here, he's just turning up and doing the work. And I can see him getting stronger. We're starting to talk about increasing his weight. And he's starting to he's lifting weights much heavier than the average woman. He's starting to push himself more, but it's taken him a year to do that, okay, training twice a week. So that shows you the speed of progression. At any point, he could either dial back his diet and slow down that process of fat loss. He could dial back his strength training and slow down the process of gaining muscle, and all of which would have an impact on his physique, okay? Now, he's 27. He's a young man, prime of his life, with testosterone, and that's his kind of results. So now you extrapolate that to a woman who doesn't have testosterone. Even a woman at the same age is not going to have that much testosterone. It's just the nature of the reality of the world. If you're looking at a middle-aged woman who's going through perimenopause, they're going to have even less testosterone and certainly even less estrogen. And they're going to start off with much less muscle mass on their frame, much different responsibilities in their lives. They may have kids and things like that. So you create and you start adding on top all these different potential breaks or obstacles, and you start to see that the reality of getting bulky becomes harder and harder, okay? It takes progressive overload over many, many years. Now, I've been training for a long time, and incrementally, week on week, I'm slowly increasing my strength, increasing my physical ability. I'm in 46 and I'm stronger than I've ever been. I feel really, really confident physically. But I'm not putting on tons and tons of mass. And I lift much heavier than certainly any of the women in my client base and most of the men. And bulking for me is a challenge, okay? So for many people, bulking would require quite a lot of frequency. It would require a plan, very specific exercises. It would require lifting extremely heavy and eating correctly. There would be a phase where you might need to eat a lot of food, much more than you're comfortable with, and then a period of very high levels of dieting to reveal that muscle. And so it's not that women can't build muscle, okay? So that's one thing I want to say, is women can definitely build muscle. We've got a lady at the moment who's she's in her just 40s. She's lost around, I think, around 16 kilos of weight. She's lost around about 13.5 kilos of fat. And the rest she's put on, since September this is, so September 2025, she's put on about 2.5 kilos of muscle. And that for her is from training twice a week. So she's lost 13.5 kilos of fat and put on 2.5 kilos of muscle. That's been big. Now you think about the difference here. So what is bulking? Bulking is often when someone's had too much food and they're eating and they're putting on too much fat, okay? Whether it's on their arms or their waist or whether their hips, wherever they're genetically predisposed to put it. And it's that feeling of being both more muscular, because you have put on a little bit of muscle, or the muscle's activated more, it feels tighter, and you put some body fat on top of it, okay? Then you're going to start feeling much bigger, okay? You're going to feel stronger physically, you're going to feel your posture's changed, you're going to feel your muscles are very tight, you've got different kind of muscle activation, and you've got more fat. This lady, however, has put on that muscle, 2.5 kilos, I don't know, I haven't got a weight next to me I can grab. It's very small. 2.5 kilos can easily fit into your hand. 15 kilos is very different experience. You hold a 15 kilo dumbbell, you're having to work hard, okay? 2.5 kilos, pretty easy to hold. She's lost roughly 15 kilos of fat and she's only gained 2.5 kilos of muscle. So that's going to make her smaller. So this idea of bulking is very different. I think bulking is very much a perception thing. What people don't realize is that when they start training, if they've never trained before, their mind-muscle connection changes, the way they feel about their body, the way it's activated, state of readiness, blood flow into the muscles, activation of the muscle fibers, everything changes. And so your proprioception of your body changes. Your relationship to your body changes. So the real risk is not getting too big, okay? The real risk is never pushing hard enough to change. I would say that's the real risk, okay? So the real risk is you don't do anything and you stay exactly the same. And if anything, you'll accelerate sarcopenia, the loss of muscle, the loss of bone density. How hard you have to work against that tide, okay? So you're trying to run on a treadmill that's going the other way. Because once you get past 30 particularly, you're going to be accelerating that process of muscle loss. The calories that you consumed at the age of 20 are starting to mean your body's putting on fat, okay? Because you've got less muscle. You're probably moving less. You've got a desk job. You've now spent 10, 15 years at that desk, okay? You're maybe not moving enough as much because you've got young children and you've just locked into the house, okay? You're eating in the evenings because you've changed to a different country where it's colder and you've changed your entire kind of social network, okay? So most people never work hard enough and they don't know what it feels like to work hard enough to become bulky. You have to work pretty hard. Firstly, you're going against nature's desire to make you smaller and be more efficient with your muscle mass versus the amount of work that you've got to do in order to gain that muscle, the amount of protein you have to eat, the amount of progressive overload you need to plan for, the amount of consistency you need in your diary. And most people are understimulated in their training. They're not lifting weights. that are challenging enough. They're not creating that stimulus. They're then not recovering well enough after they've created that stimulus. They don't have a plan around sleep. They don't have a plan around their food intake. And I suppose it's just quiet avoidance masters caution, okay? So what I want to say is, if you wanted to become bulky, this is what you would need to do. You would firstly need to eat in a calorie surplus for a while. You would need to give your body an opportunity to build muscle, okay? And it's not going to build muscle in a state of starvation. So firstly, you'd need to have adequate calorie intake and probably prioritizing a lot of protein. So maybe 1.8 to 2 grams per kilo of body weight. So for me at 186, I'd be getting up to about almost 200 grams of protein. You would need to do that consistently for many, many months, probably a year, okay? So if you're someone who's predominantly pretty skinny, you probably need to spend a year of eating enough. And then alongside that, training really hard. You'd need to train 3 to maybe 5 times a week. You'd need to be steadily increasing the weights that you were using to the point where you were certainly hitting what we would say is some strength standards, being able to squat, say, 1.5 body weight, being able to deadlift a similar amount, being able to bench press your body weight. You'd need to be hitting certain strength standards in order to start having enough mass. And then once you've been training with that progressive overload for a period of time, you would then need to go into a calorie deficit that was strategic and that was consistent for long enough. Because you might need to lose 20 to 30 to 40 pounds of body weight and fat predominantly, whilst at the same time maintaining your muscle. Because you can quite easily lose muscle as you lose weight. And it does happen. When we've had clients who've lost a lot of fat, they do lose some muscle. The key thing is that when we're helping them, they're going to minimize the amount of muscle that they do lose by strength training. But if your goal is to become bulky, you're going to have to increase your muscle mass to then cut back, okay? So then you're going to have to go on a calorie-controlled diet for much longer than you think. And it's much more aggressive than you think, and you're going to have to lose much more fat than you think. The funny thing is that when you reveal all that muscle at the end of it, say you've lost yourself 30 pounds, you're probably going to be overall much smaller. You're going to fit into much smaller clothes. The problem is that for many people, it's that visual contrast, which is quite jarring for people who aren't used to it. I've never worked with someone with that level of bodybuilding discipline. I don't have that level of discipline in my diet particularly. Firstly, if you have the genetic ability, and then you've got to realize those genetics. There are very few men who can build a physique of a bodybuilder, and there are even less women. And for the men, they have to work like crazy to get it. And secondly, the women have to work doubly hard, okay? And they have to be consistent, and they have to do it in a healthy way. And what you forget is there's this unspoken thing is that most people who are on stage as bodybuilders, who are very bulky, and even the ones sometimes that don't look great, are on some kind of performance-enhancing drug. So there's a lot of, you can get legal ones, particularly in America, it's much more common, which is testosterone for men. But then you've got all the other drugs out there. It's a world which I've never really delved into. I'm aware of it. There are much more knowledgeable individuals than myself, without a doubt, and I would never know how to even start. But people who are bodybuilding will often need performance-enhancing drugs to take them to that next level. Usually they might spend anywhere from like 6 to 10 years of solid work building that, building a full realization of their genetic potential before they take on some kind of performance-enhancing drug. But ultimately, to get yourself to that very high level of bodybuilding attainment, then you would need to take a drug. And what you see is that people who stop taking the drugs, they lose a lot of mass. So unless you're secretly taking some kind of steroid like Trenbolone, or you're taking TRT and not telling your PT, the chances of you getting bulky are very low. So I think I just want to close it there. Strength isn't going to get you bulky. Strength is going to give you options. Strength makes it very easy to succeed in loads of other things. You're going to become a better version of you. You're going to be able to be more capable. You're going to feel more confident. You're going to make better decisions around your own needs. You're going to have a discipline in your life that's going to transfer to other areas. You're going to be a great example to other people. And strength is going to get you lean. Strength is going to get you into the clothes that you love. Strength is going to keep you vigorous and young for as long as possible. Muscle is the elixir of life. It makes you young. The younger you are, the more muscle mass you will naturally retain. So as you age, you need to do that. And bulking will come at you like the slowest train ever. And I say this to my clients all the time. If you've ever watched Austin Powers, and there's that scene where you've got that steamroller coming towards that guard. The guard is standing there screaming, and then the shot cuts back, and he's about 40 feet away, and the steamroller's going about 3 miles per hour. He's got all the time in the world to get out of the way, and he doesn't, obviously. He gets completely crushed by the steamroller, and all he needed to do was step to one side. Being bulky is like that. It's like the steamroller. It's going to come at you that slowly. If you need to move out of the way, you step to one side. You stop training for 3 weeks, you're going to lose a lot of that muscle mass, or you're going to lose the momentum rather. Okay? So if you are getting bulky, or you feel that you are getting bulky, it's probably because you're eating too much. It's probably because your calories are out of control. So that's the area you should spend. I've never met one of our clients who hasn't got stronger and leaner and not felt really, really amazing about their body and really, really pleased with their results. I've never had that. The body adapts slowly, it adapts predictably, and the benefits of strength far outweigh any fears that you may have. If you have a fear, reduce the fear by increasing your knowledge and putting into practice some of that knowledge. You will quite quickly come to the realization that the chances of getting bulky or chances of getting a result you're not happy with, that you're not in the driving seat for, they completely just melt away. And I think as soon as you start taking action, that fear will disappear because you suddenly realize you're in control. You're the one who steers the ship. So I hope that's been useful. It's certainly something that we hear frequently. As you know, this podcast is now as a video on Spotify. It's also on YouTube. We also have our own Instagram page for this podcast. But my business is called Hands of Health. So if you are in Wandsworth and you do want to learn a little bit more about how to get stronger, please do get in touch with us. We've got a website at the bottom of this in the description. But yeah, like and subscribe, share this with the people, and hope to grow this podcast.